greetings from dismal, rainy Massachusetts. It's really nice to be here today. I did want to kind of say before we begin that given the nature of this talk, you might hear some things that challenge your view of the world or your sense of identity. And I'd like to ask you to listen with a sense of curiosity and an open mind. And it's also a two-way street. If I use terminology that you take issue with or that you have questions about, please reach out to me after the talk so that I can learn from you and your perspectives. So kind of to kick it off a little bit about me, my pronouns are he, him, his. I am a white male with masculine presenting with a beard and glasses and dark hair, wearing a headset. Looks like customer service. I'm a designer at Ad Hoc. I actually recently changed jobs and I work on the healthcare.gov system, which helps people get insurance and medical benefits if they cannot get it through their employer. It's a kind of a big deal and it's a lot of great responsibility. I am an author at CSS Tricks and Smashing Magazine. I also maintain the A11Y project, a little bit more on that in a bit. I also contribute to the Mozilla Development Network documentation for accessibility, and I'm really stoked to be here today. So the A11Y project is basically a one-stop shop where you can go to learn about digital accessibility, how to do it, some myths, some background, some lived experiences. There's resources and blog posts, as well as kind of a checklist that you can refer to see if your digital designs are accessible. I've also operated as a accessibility auditor for the company Tenon, which basically is the practice of figuring out if there's access barriers in a website, in a web app, in an app, or another digital experience, and how to remove them. As I mentioned before, this is the Mozilla Developer Network web docs, which is kind of like a more easy to understand version of the web standards that kind of power the whole internet. So definitely this is something you can also look up if you're curious about accessibility. We have some really good writing there as well. And kind of on that note, what is accessibility? It's kind of a loaded term. So I figured for this talk, I can kind of help to clarify what it is specifically in the context of design and on the internet. To start it off, I do want to frame this as accessibility is a civil right. This is a photo of the Capitol crawl, where disability activists abandoned their assistive technology, such as canes and wheelchairs, to physically crawl up the steps of the Capitol in DC. This was to gain visibility for their cause. It was kind of a landmark moment in the disability rights community, which led to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which prohibited discrimination of disabled persons. This also led to the American Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities, founded in 1975. This is important because it's the first disability rights group that was created, governed, and administered by disabled individuals themselves, as well as the first group to pull together disparate disability groups to come together as kind of a monolithic group to advocate for disability rights. And, kind of to build off of this, here's the textbook description of what accessible design is. It's the design of products, devices, services, or environments for disabled people. This means that, we can have something that may work, say, for somebody who is sighted. They can kind of see the screen like you may be doing right now, but depending on how it's built, it may not be able to be parsed by somebody who is blind or who has low vision, who's using a screen reader, and they don't get the same quality of access to information. And that's kind of important to know because it could be something really serious, like signing up for benefits, or it could be something as kind of that's a little bit more fun, like getting a movie ticket. And the important thing to know here is like both of these are kind of the same in that as a person in the world, you may want benefits and you may want to go to the movies, at least once quarantine is over. And you should be able to do it regardless of kind of your circumstances. You may also see this floating around on the internet. So we have the word accessibility, and then there's basically 11 letters between A and Y in the term. And this is a neuronym, which shortens to A11Y, which is also the name of the A11Y project. This stands for accessibility. Specifically, it stands for digital accessibility. So this helps to kind of clarify where it's like there might be libraries help to make information more accessible. That's well and true and good, but also A11Y speaks to specifically like what can we do to make web technology and digital technology usable by people who use assistive technology. So how do we actually do this? How do we make our designs accessible? We want to kind of learn about the acronym POUR. POUR is basically 4 concepts that feed into something called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They're the overarching principles on how to approach something to make it be able to be accessed regardless of your ability or circumstances. So first we have perceivable. Is there anything on our website that a blind, deaf, low vision, or colorblind user would not be able to perceive? For the colorblind example, if we're using color alone to indicate status, if you're red, green colorblind, green means go, red means stop for like say a service, and you don't have a text label or an icon to help communicate that, they may not know. And that might be pretty bad for a situation where it's like a uptime monitoring dashboard. Next up, we have operable. And this is basically not everybody has the use of their hands or can use a mouse. So can all the functions of your app or website be performed with a keyboard? Can users control interactive elements on our experience? Does the website make completing the tasks easy and intuitive? Think about conditions where you have chronic pain, where like lots of complicated steps and that are completely unnecessary actually might physically harm someone. Next, we have understandable. Do I know how to use this? Is all the content that you have on your experience written clearly? Are the interactions easy to understand? I'm sure you've all had kind of a time where you've used a website or an app and you're like, this makes no sense. That's actually an access barrier. And then finally, we have robust, which is personally, it's my favorite one. And does your experience work across a wide range of, technologies? Is it supported on the newest browsers, the newest operating systems? The same way I can look at a website on my laptop is the same way that I can look at a website on my phone, is the same way that I can look at a website on my Kindle. That's robustness in play. And it means that you're able to do things, regardless of kind of what device you may have at hand. Next up, this is a term you might hear thrown around with accessibility, and it's inclusive design. And while accessibility kind of big picture is about finding access barriers and removing them, inclusive design is a little bit more, in my opinion, it's a little bit more proactive. It challenges us by asking if we have a disability to kind of to reframe the conversation. And these are some uncomfortable questions, but, and I apologize for being direct, but I think they're questions that are well worth asking yourself. First of all, with your identity in regards to disability, do you self-identify? Oftentimes this can be a source of shame or stigma, and that's something that society puts on individuals. So inclusive design kind of embraces the term disabled and basically co-opts it from a negative to a positive thing. And some questions around identity here. The favorite one I like to ask is, are you wearing glasses? I am. I'm nearsighted. Technically, that's a disability. If you've experienced depression, or anxiety, especially during quarantine and the pandemic. It's interesting, depression is actually the most widespread disability condition in the world, but without the framing of inclusive design, we don't always think about it that way. Another thing to think about is, will you get old? With age comes diminished capacities, your eyesight, your cognitive function, your ability to physically do things in the world. It's kind of interesting to note that through this lens, disability is the one minoritized group that eventually everyone on the planet will enter into. So, again, it's all about recontextualization. Inclusive design embraces what's known as the social model of disability as opposed to the medical model, where the medical model treats people like problems to be solved. So what can we do to you to get you out of this wheelchair and walking again? And that necessarily isn't always valid. Again, people aren't a problem to be solved. Instead, we should be asking the questions about what is it that society does to make this an issue? Why are we building staircases instead of ramps? Why are we constructing experiences where you need to be dependent on color and specifically notions of culture around color to be able to operate and move about in the world? And then how do we accommodate that worldview? And the reason I really enjoy inclusive design is this helps stop to prevent othering, where we kind of draw this line between being abled or disabled. And we have this model that instead you're impaired, either conditionally or permanently, biologically or mentally or societally. And it helps us to understand that it's not just about us. It's about our families, our friends, and their families and friends. And kind of to extrapolate on this, it's something that anyone may at any time experience as they navigate through this world. So inclusive design is also a new way of looking at an old idea. And this is really interesting to me and hopefully to you too. So a little bit of a history lesson. The Air Force had this problem in the 50s where pilots were dying because they couldn't control their jets. And the military really isn't into feelings, it's into results. So it's not really the problem that the pilots were dying, it's that it's really expensive to train pilots and it's really expensive to make jets. And so they did a little bit of research and, with the pilot error, they found out that the configuration of the cockpit was actually a factor. So the controls to operate the jet were making people create mistakes, which led to their deaths. So they did this huge study to determine, what the average size pilot was, because they figured, oh, okay, well, we'll just figure out kind of what the average, male military fighter pilot is, and then we'll just reconfigure it around that. And so they measured 4,000 pilots on 140 dimensions of size, including their thumb length, the crotch height, distance of the eye and to the ear to the seat, and then kind of boil it down to an average. And basically they found out that of these 4,000 pilots, with this new average approach to a cockpit, 0 pilots actually were able to use this cockpit in a comfortable way. So by making generalizations about the people using your technology, it actually didn't work. And so the military, again, wanting to basically increase efficiency, they found out that by presenting buckles and straps as a way to kind of move the seat around and adjust your position in there, it actually helped pilots work. It increased the rate of survival and the rate of success in testing. And it actually wound up to be cheaper to kind of, once they got the manufacturers on board, to put in buckles and adjustments as opposed to just one static kind of configuration. That's really interesting. And then, kind of building off of that, a little bit more history. Inclusive design is universal design. And this is kind of a lens on how to build buildings, but I think it also applies to software. So when you enter into a building, you approach it with a mindset of, how can you make this usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design? And this was developed by Ronald Mace in North Carolina State University in 1997. So it's a relatively new thing. And kind of the thing that he's pushing on here is you want to create products and environments that be approached, reached, manipulated, regardless of an individual's body size, posture, or mobility. This minimizes the need for assistive technology. Again, we question the built environments around us, which results in longer lasting, in this case, buildings, but it could also translate to software. Inclusive design is also intersectional. And this is a theory coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. It's a feminist framework that recognizes the interconnected nature of social categorization, such as race, class, and gender. The theory existed 2 decades earlier with Black feminists that began to speak out about the white middle class nature of the mainstream feminist movement. And basically what this pushes against is people have different personal and perceived identities in different contexts. Its goal is to avoid addressing injustice towards one group, perpetuating systems of inequities to other groups. So this is kind of huge when we talk about race, but also when we talk about disability. It's a concern that strives to avoid generalizing statements, oversimplifying of concepts that erase self-identity, being cognizant of the space you operate in, taking the time to understand other individuals' point of view, and taking action, importantly, and participate in the systems that affect you. So, okay, that's cool. We have some background. So, how do we do this? How do we take this kind of crash course in theory and bring it into our designs? First, you want to provide a comparable experience. Ensure your interface provides a comparable experience for all so people can accomplish tasks in a way that suits their needs without undermining the quality of the content. A good way to think about this is Touch ID on your iPhone or the little finger draggy password thing on an Android device. You can put your thumb down and use Touch ID, and that works. And you can draw your little pattern to unlock your phone, and that also works. But you can also type your password in, and that also works. So those are 2 different ways to get the overall thing that you want, which is access to your phone when it's in a unlocked state. Other is consider a situation. So people use your interface in different situations. Make sure your interface delivers a valuable experience to people regardless of their circumstance. And a great way I like to think about this is color contrast. So that is the kind of the amount of contrast between content on a screen and the background it's placed over. And so that's nice for like legibility, but when's the last time you went outside and you were on your phone and the sun was right overhead at noon and the glare kept you from reading something? That's kind of situationally you're being disabled by the way too bright overhead sun. Be consistent is to use familiar conventions and apply them consistently. As designers, we like creating patterns. We like creating like style systems. So this one is almost a gimme. Good way to think about this is links, making your links underlined to make them look like other links on the internet. And then when you create your website, making that link style be used all across the website on all the different pages and categories. And then give control. People should be able to access and interact with the content in their preferred way. You're not going to be there to be able to hover over their shoulder and tell somebody, no, you're doing it wrong, and then show them the quote right way to do it. And a practical example of this that I like is when I read email on my phone, I can swipe to delete it, or I can tap the delete button, or I can pop open bulk mode and check a bunch off and then delete them. It lets me approach an interface in the way I want to take action in a way that makes sense to me in that moment. And then kind of offer choice. You want to provide different ways for people to complete tasks, especially those that are, complex or non-standard. This kind of gets into sometimes when you have a complicated workflow, are there ways to resolve redundancies or inefficiencies? Are there different ways to approach, like in the context of like a quiz? Do you need more accommodation for more time? That kind of thing. And then my favorite one, prioritize content, is to help users focus on core tasks, features, and information by prioritizing them within the content and the layout. This is basically, the main point is the main point. And as designers, this is something we definitely want to do, which is make it clear and obvious and easy to use. And you'd be surprised sometimes at how difficult that is. Finally is add value, which is think about your features holistically, think about the impact that it creates, think about the experience for different kinds of people. We're really beginning to see this as technology really kind of matures and percolates more into our everyday lives. Sometimes it's a good thing, more interconnectedness, the ability to have conferences like this over Zoom. And then sometimes there's unanticipated bad negative effects where like a new feature might increase the risk for harm for something like stalking, or potentially this new feature actually disrupts an existing experience and creates access barriers. I'm sure there's been circumstances where an app you've had is updated and you're like, oh, I don't like this and I don't really want to use it anymore, and you delete it. Sometimes people don't have that option. So when these features are added, they actually create accessibility issues, which keep them from doing things like buying groceries, which is not great. The other thing about this is the mindset to approach this when kind of talking with other people. So like I might be selling you on this whole accessibility and inclusive design thing, but you as designers also have to sell it back to other people, kind of hopefully the way I'm doing it now. And so there's two approaches in my mind that you can take. First is lawsuits. Again, access is a civil right, and it's a respected, protected kind of thing. And people will sue for lack of access. And that's good. People should be able to do that because they shouldn't be discriminated against the same way they shouldn't be discriminated against because of their race, their gender, their religion. But I want this to be a last-ditch thing because, you will get access as a result of the lawsuit if it does go through, but it is going to turn people involved in it off completely after the fact. I like to appeal to other motivational factors, specifically opportunity. Inclusive design and accessible experiences are quality experiences, by which I mean they have a lot of staying power and they're easy to use, which usually translates to successful products. Recently, and this is very interesting to me, in 2018, the American Institutes for Research had a report called A Hidden Market, the Purchasing Power of People with Disabilities. And in taking kind of a broader lens of what disability meant, including things like depression and anxiety, and not just being blind or using a wheelchair, they found that there is an estimated 490 billion dollars in disposable income amongst disabled working age adults in the United States. That's a lot of money. And you might be rolling your eyes at this, but just to kind of help reframe it, this is the Hansen writing ball, which is an early kind of precursor to the typewriter. It was invented by the Reverend Ramses Malling Hansen, who was the principal of the Royal Institute for the Deaf Mutes in Copenhagen. This was done way back in the 1800s. And this is actually the precursor to the modern keyboard, which is what is probably sitting right below your screen right now. The other thing I'd like to say, and this has kind of become a thing in recent months, is don't use accessibility overlay solutions, specifically products such as Accessibility, Audio Eye, and Max Access. Specifically, the National Federation of the Blind came out against them to basically say that these make the experiences for disabled individuals using the web worse. And they actually increase the risk and likelihood of a lawsuit because of how they do what they do. Again, I remind you, humans are not a problem to be solved. Accessible concerns are, holistic human concerns, and you can't automate these kinds of things away. I've actually provided expert testimony about this for lawsuits, and specifically, I'd like to call attention to their promises of artificial intelligence are a straight up lie. So they're really deceptive and predatory. They offer a quick fix solution for something that categorically cannot have a quick fix solution. So again, how do we do it? How do we make accessible design? I say the best of this work happens in the prototyping phase. And by this, I mean ideas are cheap and execution is not. This is called the shift left methodology, where right now, you have your idea, you spend your time to flesh it out, to make the designs, to research with people, to put it into development, put a product out in the world. And then, oops, we discover accessibility issues for a full-fledged product. And now you have to fix them at the 11th hour. That's not great. Instead, ask these kinds of questions in the ideation phase. The sooner we can bring them in, the sooner we can test with disabled individuals to get their feedback, the sooner we can kind of do these checks when we're creating our design systems, our palettes, the photography that we're using, the interactions. We can really head a lot of this off at the pass. And that saves us time, energy, and effort, and also involves, better representational populations into the things that we're doing for the people that we want to eventually use it. And I'm going to take a drink of water 1 second. Thank you. The other thing to know is you live in a bubble, and that's cool so long as you recognize it. You want to test your ideas early and often. You want to kind of acknowledge the biases inherent in being a person in the world in the way that you're experiencing it. You want participants from a diverse range of backgrounds, including people with self-reported disabilities. Think about income levels, think about tech literacy, think about geographic region, that kind of stuff. And then the other thing is to keep testing after you launch. A lot of places don't do this. And, you add more features in, and then you kind of never look back to take stock of the holistic effect that they all create. A little bit more history for you. We want to kind of talk about survivor bias and how that affects the modern software kind of development design space. World War II, pilot survival rates were abysmal. And again, the military does not like this, not because it really cares about warm, squishy feelings of happiness, but because it's expensive and you don't want to lose a war. So they turn towards statistics to figure out ways to improve survival rates of pilots. And because airplanes need to fly, you can't armor an airplane the way you can a tank. So you have to be really choosy about what you put where and how much of it. So they looked at the damage on planes when they came back from combat, and they're like, okay, well, there's a lot of bullet holes here, so let's put some armor here. And the statistics of the survival rates didn't decrease. And a guy named Abraham Wald, who is part of a thing that actually exists, and it's kind of incredible that it does. It's the Department of War Math saw the problem. Planes that come back with damage, this is where they were resilient and they were able to operate regardless of what's kind of had been inflicted on them. And instead he said, put the armor on the places where we're not seeing bullet holes, and survival rates went up. Because what was happening is you saw the planes that made it back. You saw the places that were shot up and were kind of still able to function. What you didn't see is where the bullet holes weren't, because those planes crashed and those pilots died. And extending this psychological phenomenon to kind of the contemporary world, you want to think about who's present in the spaces that you operate in. And what barriers might prevent them from being present. So in your classes, in your jobs, as you move through the world, the users of your products. So kind of extending that, when we get into personas in design, personas are aggregate representations of identified demographics. And it's been historically used by marketing and design agencies to gain consensus. And if you're kind of feeling like, ooh, I don't know about that after listening to this talk, thank you, you're along for the ride. Um, a persona will say like Julie is a married 30 to 40-year-old working professional with an annual income of 65K and an interest in professional baseball. But what's, the persona for somebody who wants a candy bar? Everybody more or less eats candy bars at some point. And that kind of blows Julie out of the water in terms of like a persona to get a thing. Context is really king, is what I'm driving at here. Both Prince Charles and Ozzy Osbourne are male, 70 years old, English, have children, are wealthy, married, remarried, own real estate, likes to take vacations in the Alps, likes to listen to music, and likes dogs. These are two radically different people. But this is a framework, like using personas as a framework is not going to let this fly. So what we can do instead is use a jobs to be done framework to kind of go for underlying motivational values as an individual, like who you are, what has brought me to this context, and what do you ultimately want. You don't really want the candy bar. You want the feeling of satisfaction while you're bored in the checkout aisle. You also want to meet people where they are, listen to what they're saying, but also pay attention to how they say it and what they are experiencing, and then create patterns about this. This will help you to gain consensus throughout the entire design process. So again, how do we do it? Okay, cool. You've got some theory, got some, some kind of high level stuff. Use plain language. Text is king. The easier it is to understand, the easier it is to use. You want to refine your user experience, testing, using heading levels, logical page structure, negative space to set copy and other page elements abroad. Place the important stuff at the top of the experience. Refine your typography, limited fonts, adequate body font size, bump it up a little bit. It can't hurt. Make your type size adjustments predictable so you can kind of get a sense of hierarchy. You want to refine your color choices as well. Use color contrast. Don't rely on color alone to convey meaning. Don't place text over complicated backgrounds. And actually, a limited color palette can help to aid with understanding, especially if you reserve, one or a few colors for interactable things. You also want to refine your forms. They're the workhorses of modern UI. They don't get a lot of love, and that's a shame. Make your required fields obvious. Make sure they have visible labels. Make your error and success states really easy to understand. Group them into logical sections. Avoid asking for redundant information. You as designers should do the hard work to make that easy. And then, place your submit button last and make it really obvious. Refine your media. Break down your components into simple interactions. Make sure things like animations don't autoplay. And if they do, provide a pause button. Make sure you can zoom your screen up to 400%. All that is good stuff. And then kind of last or second to last, we're always so quick to use the latest and greatest and want the new shiny, but provide a framework where, does this need to be an app? Is this something that, in our designs, we can create something that somebody doesn't have to interact with to get what they want? A great example of this is we had a client who wanted a dashboard because there were some inefficiencies in a workflow, but we were able to actually talk with the people who would be using the dashboard. And it turned out what they actually needed was an automated email campaign to send them kind of a status update twice a week. And then kind of finally, what is the evil version of your feature as you're going out and creating designs and creating products and creating software? How could somebody take this and use it to create harm? And in doing so, if you kind of answer that question for yourself, you can guard against it, which kind of is cool because you have the responsibility to your users. And in anticipating that, you might help to prevent harm. All that being said, thank you to UX UICC for this opportunity. And thank you to the other speakers and to you, the audience, for listening to me here today. I really appreciate it. I will make sure that slides are posted, as well as some resources that I use to create this talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think accessibility and inclusive design is something that I feel like it's just brushed over when learning about design. And I think that's, we need to learn more about how we can design inclusively. And I think you really helped start that off for us.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm also having a little bit of an allergy attack, so I apologize for the
Yeah.
coughing towards the end.
Yeah, it's okay. Did you want to answer any questions
Yeah, if anyone, I'd love to.
Yeah, does anyone have questions?
I actually have a question. So I love how you design for accessibility so you can make products accessible to almost anyone. So I was wondering, like, what are your biggest challenges as a designer? And if you have like any advice for those who also want to be designers in the near future.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. The biggest barrier I run into in discussing accessibility is that typically it's saying no to things. People don't like hearing no. So, you create this wonderful branding palette, and it turns out it doesn't meet minimum contrast requirements. And, it's one thing to kind of come in and say like, well, this is bad and you should feel bad because, low vision people might not be able to read it. And that's true, but it takes, the designer who came up with that palette and spent weeks, potentially working on it is going to feel like crap. So I like to reframe it as much as I possibly can. Sometimes it's even like taking a potential design and taking somebody with low vision and like asking them what they think and recording it and showing it to the person. Because if you can connect it back to a person, like most people want to do good and they want to help people and they don't want to hurt people. And if they can see something like that, it's a really powerful thing. So like that's kind of like big picture, the biggest one I run into. The other one in the like really immediate is just underline your links, please. Like it's fine. Don't worry about it. You might think it looks ugly, but like especially for populations that have a low degree of tech literacy, these are things that they cling to, in an interface to know that it's something that they can do. And like through that lens, it's really huge. Like, do you want to buy a thing? Does that link have an underline so you can learn about the details of the product? Awesome, that's going to help them. Do you want to get food benefits? This was actually a client we had at a previous job, and we underlined links to help them get SNAP. And when we did that, we actually saw a noticeable uptick for populations actually going through the site and converting and getting food benefits. And that's huge too. Yeah.
Thank you for your question. So I kind of got out from it that empathy is a big thing when it comes to designing for those who are disabled or like visually impaired. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And I'd also advise like co-designing as much as possible, which is like empathy only gets you so far. But like if you can speak with somebody directly, who's blind about how they feel about it, like that's an insight you will never get, in a 15-minute research session.
Thank you so much for your question.
Thank you.
And someone in the chat, Christina A said, do you have a resource suggestion where we can read more about the history, like the military cockpit example?
Yes, they're in my slides. Hold on, I'm going to see if I can hop through it real quickly. Oh my gosh, doing it live. No, but I will make sure it's in the slides. I know that's kind of a non-answer, but I want to make sure I can send you to the right place.
And Annie asked, what do you generally do when accessibility sometimes will contradict, for lack of a better term, each other? For example, higher contrast colors may be better for people with less sensitive vision, but may be straining for people with sensitive vision.
I love that question. Oh my God, that's so good. Yeah, the other thing is the disability community any kind of point out, it's not a monolith. So what is helpful for one person may actually be harmful for somebody else. And the kind of the hand wavy answer here is you want to make sure that your content and your designs are adaptable. So, through the context of an app, like a phone app, if the contrast of your palette is affecting somebody with, with like light sensitivity, potentially offering a dark mode theme or different kind of visual themes that you can swipe through. Those are really helpful. It's the ability to give somebody choice to make something fit for what works for them. And not being kind of precious about like, well, our brand color is red, bright red, and really dark black, which vibrate very strongly against each other. It's our brand experience lets you do this and feel this way while doing it. And if you're using this theme while you do it, that's great. If you want to use a different one, that's cool too, because you're still ultimately getting what you want. The other thing I'd kind of point out is on the web, it's a little easier because you have things like browser extensions, which are assistive technology. I have some friends that, have ADHD and some light sensitivity that use like forcing colors to create like a more uniform experience on the web, regardless of the website they're looking at. And that's fine because they're still visiting your website and reading your content and, buying your stuff. So it's successful design in my book.
And Tiana said or asked, how did you find yourself in the accessibility design space, or what drew you to it? Was it a personal story, or did you just stumble into it?
I kind of stumbled in. One of my first jobs out of school was for a agency that subcontracted to the government, and the government requires everything that it produces and puts out to be accessible by law. And so I learned about the web content accessibility guidelines. And I, like, as a designer, I was like, this is like a cheat sheet. Like, this is like how to do, usable design. I just got to follow these rules. And then from there, I became more involved and aware of the disability community, and I started to learn more about the history and the theory behind it. And it's been very rewarding to me. It's a very welcoming community. And like, I super like encourage you to kind of explore it a little bit and see what it's all about.
Yeah, I think even if you're not going to go and like do inclusive like design as a career per se, I think it's always something that you should be looking to, as you said before.
Yeah.
And I kind of had a question too. Well, I guess it kind of got answered. Yeah, my question got answered actually, but I don't know if anyone else. Okay. Christina A asked, can you provide an example of an evil vision of design feature that you've encountered or come to mind?
Yeah. That's another good question. Unfortunately, it's a good question. I'm thinking specifically of a chat support tool that was used by an ISP that didn't have blocking or reporting features. And in this context, there's an asymmetry of power where a person asking for support is disclosing their real name and potentially their account information to an unknown entity who is the agent who is fielding their call. And in this situation, somebody's name and their account number, and that means the agent can get access to their address. And in addition, like quick Google search, they can do a little cyber stalking and get, their Instagram or whatever. So if there is a unpleasant interaction, there is no way for the person using the support to kind of flag it so it can be reviewed. And that's pretty gross. And unfortunately, it has also happened in the real world. So like that's taking a feature that's completely innocuous and subverting it for evil purposes to get, for the attacker to get what they want, which is not great.
had a question. So earlier on, you mentioned like how depression is actually the most common disability, and you mentioned anxiety as well. Like, what are some important things to consider to be inclusive for specifically for like anxiety and depression?
Yeah. And just to back that up, that's not me saying this. The World Health Organization did a report like a few years ago, and it kind of blew my mind. So when you're depressed and when you're anxious, your like physiologically, your ability to problem solve is actually diminished, which is weird and scary and kind of cool in that like a lot of things that work that are good design. So being really clear and obvious about intent and making your interactions very easy to understand. Those help in situations where somebody is depressed. And then like personally, I have anxiety, I take meds for it, but like in an anxious state, I'm sure conditionally it's happened to you where it's like, there's a timer timing down, you need to fill out this form so you can get tickets. And then all of a sudden, oh gosh, like I've forgotten how to use the internet. Like I'm making typos and I'm like flying all over the place and clicking on everything and it's not working. And oh my God, it's gonna be too late. Oh God, oh geez, oh no, what do I do? So just being really simplifying your design, streamlining them, making them very obvious and apparent as much as possible, removing things that conditionally create stress. And then also error recovery. So if you do the thing and you submit it, you have the ability to be like, oh shoot, no, that was wrong, and then resubmit it or like fix something after the fact.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, like one thing that will sometimes bother me is like a lot of pop-ups, even if it's meant to be helpful, like those pop-up chats that come up sometimes, like, and especially if it's repetitive, like while I'm trying to focus on something, sometimes that's difficult for me.
Yeah. I have some friends with ADHD and it's just a nightmare for them. Like a lot of them use Blocker specifically to like turn that off because it's like, you come in expecting to want to do one thing and then wait, what was I doing again? Oh God, why am I here? What is my life?
Does anyone else have any questions? If not, where can people find you, Eric?
Sure. My website is ericwbailey.design, and that has links to my Twitter and LinkedIn and all that good stuff. And also, I am online way too much. If you have a question about anything, please don't hesitate to email me. I would love to, if this is something you're interested in, I'd love to kind of connect you to the right resources and people.
Thank you so much. I think, yeah, so we're good.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really valuable.
Yeah, thank you. This was a great opportunity and I really appreciate it.
Okay, awesome. So I think we're going to take a 10-minute break here for our next event. And let's see, next we have, starting at 12, we will have a talk on becoming your engineering team's favorite designer. So just take a break, grab coffee, whatever, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. Thanks, guys.